The sun was a hot, indifferent weight on the city, pressing down on the asphalt until heat shimmered up in lazy waves. From inside the cool dark of the diner, the world outside looked bleached and overexposed. Lena watched it through the plate glass window, her body humming with the low-grade exhaustion of a 9-hour shift on her feet. The orange of her uniform felt loud in the afternoon quiet. Her white apron, stained with the ghosts of coffee and ketchup, was a map of her day. She was 19 and she felt ancient. Most days, she measured her life in stacked plates and wiped-down tables. Today was no different. Then she saw the woman. She was sitting at one of the wrought iron tables on the patio, a small, still figure lost in the glare. An old woman, Korean by the delicate architecture of her face, with a cloud of white hair and sunglasses so dark they seemed to swallow the light. She wasn't eating. A plate of half-eaten kimchi stew sat before her, untouched for the last 20 minutes. The woman's hands were folded in her lap, her head tilted as if listening to a conversation only she could hear. It was her stillness that caught Lena's attention. Tourists fidgeted, locals checked their phones. This woman simply existed, a study in patience. Lena watched as the woman reached a tentative hand out, searching for her water glass. Her fingers brushed past it, once, twice, before retreating to the safety of her lap. She was blind. The realization landed not with a jolt, but with a soft, aching sense of recognition. Another person navigating a world not built for them. Lena knew that feeling down to her bones. Her manager, a man whose patience was as thin as his hairline, was watching the clock. Her shift was over. Freedom was 5 minutes away. But the image of the woman's searching hand stayed with her. Compassion was a luxury, a thing she usually couldn't afford to feel this deeply after a long day. It cost energy she didn't have. But sometimes it wasn't a choice. It was an imperative. Lena untied her apron, folding it and placing it on the counter. She clocked out. Instead of pushing through the front door and into the blessed anonymity of the street, she grabbed a fresh fork and a glass of water. She walked out onto the sun-drenched patio, the heat hitting her like a physical blow. The air smelled of exhaust fumes and hot concrete. She approached the table quietly. The woman didn't stir, her posture unchanged. Lena pulled out the chair opposite her and sat down, the metal groaning in protest. The woman's head turned slightly towards the sound. "Excuse me," Lena said, her voice soft.
"Mang?"
"My name is Lena. I saw you from inside. Would you like some help with your meal?" The woman remained silent for a long moment. Her face was a mask of wrinkles, each line telling a story Lena couldn't read. Finally, she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Lena took that as permission. She moved the plate closer, the rich, spicy scent of the stew rising in the heat. "It's a kimchi jjigae," Lena said, more to fill the silence than anything else. "It smells really good." She took the fork, speared a small piece of tofu and some cabbage and held it out. "It might be a little hot." She blew on it gently, a gesture learned from a childhood spent caring for younger siblings. She brought the fork to the woman's lips. The woman hesitated, then opened her mouth. Her trust was a fragile, precious thing. Lena fed her slowly, carefully, describing each bite. The soft tofu, the fermented tang of the kimchi, the savory pork. They ate in a shared silence, broken only by Lena's quiet murmurs and the distant sounds of the city. It was an act of profound intimacy, feeding a stranger under the harsh afternoon sun. Lena didn't think about why she was doing it. She didn't think about the ache in her feet or the bus she was going to miss. For these few minutes, there was only the quiet rhythm of the fork, the woman's silent acceptance, and a strange sense of peace that settled over her, cool and soothing as a glass of water. She was just a tired girl in an orange dress, feeding a blind woman on a Tuesday. It was nothing. It was everything. The first sign of his arrival was not a sound, but a shadow. It fell over their table, sudden and complete, eclipsing the harsh sun. Lena looked up, blinking against the abrupt change in light. 2 men stood there, dressed in dark suits that seemed to absorb the heat without wrinkling. They were built like brick walls, their faces impassive and hard. Behind them, a third man stepped out of the shadow and into the light. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked more like an extension of his body than a piece of clothing. His hair was black, with faint threads of silver at the temples that caught the sun. His face was all sharp angles and quiet calculation. He wasn't looking at the men or the cafe or the city. His entire, unnerving focus was on the old woman. And on Lena. His eyes, dark and intelligent, swept over the scene. The half-empty bowl of stew, the fork in Lena's hand, her fingers resting near the old woman's arm. It was an assessment cold and thorough. He was cataloging a threat. The peaceful bubble she and the woman had occupied burst, and the air crackled with a new, dangerous energy. The old woman, Haewon, seemed to sense it too. She stiffened, her head turning towards the man. "Min-jun," she said, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. It was the first word she had spoken. The man, Min-jun, moved to the table. His movements were economical and precise, radiating a kind of coiled stillness that was more menacing than any overt aggression. He knelt beside his mother's chair, ignoring Lena completely. He spoke to his mother in Korean, his voice a low, smooth murmur that was a stark contrast to his intimidating presence. Lena couldn't understand the words, but the tone was one of gentle concern, laced with an undercurrent of something else. Control. Ownership. He was the eye of a storm, and his men were the destructive winds that followed his command. Lena felt a primal urge to run, to disappear back into the city's anonymity. She was a waitress. These people, this man, they were from a different world, one that operated on rules she couldn't begin to comprehend. One of the men in the suits took a step towards her. It was a small movement, but it felt like a tectonic shift. Min-jun finished speaking with his mother and rose to his full height. He finally turned his attention to Lena. His gaze was not overtly hostile, but it was heavy, analytical. It felt like being weighed and measured. "Who are you?" he asked. His English was perfect, the accent subtle and clean. The question hung in the air, simple and direct, yet carrying the weight of an interrogation. "My name is Lena," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I work here." "I was just helping your mother with her lunch." She held his gaze, refusing to be the first to look away. It was a small act of defiance, maybe a foolish one, but it was all she had. His eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "Surprise? Annoyance?" He glanced at the bowl, then back at Lena. "You fed her, it wasn't a question." It was a statement of fact, delivered with a tone of quiet disbelief. As if the act itself were an anomaly, a variable he hadn't accounted for. "She couldn't find her fork," Lena explained, her professionalism kicking in. It was easier to pretend this was just a customer service issue. "I was happy to help." Min-jun said nothing. He simply watched her, his stillness a weapon. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken things. Lena could feel the eyes of his two guards on her back. The city noise seemed to fade into a dull roar. In that moment, she understood that this man was powerful. Not just rich man powerful, but a different kind of powerful. The kind that reshaped the world around him through sheer will. The kind that came with men in dark suits and an aura of quiet menace. He was, she realized with a cold certainty, dangerous. He was a Korean Mafia boss. The thought wasn't a wild leap. It was a logical conclusion drawn from the evidence in front of her. The deference of his men, the absolute control in his posture, the way the very air seemed to bend to his presence. He finally broke the silence. "My mother has not allowed a stranger to assist her in years." He looked from Lena to his mother, whose face remained placid, turned towards the sound of his voice. "She likes you." He took a small, pristine business card from the inside of his jacket. The card was black, impossibly thick, with a name and a number embossed in simple silver lettering. Park Min-jun. There was no title. A man like him didn't need one. He held it out to her. Lena looked at the card, then at his hand. Taking it felt like signing a contract she hadn't read. "I have no need for your card," she said, her chin lifting slightly. It was a reckless thing to say. She knew at the moment the words left her mouth. The air grew colder. One of the guards shifted his weight. Min-jun's expression didn't change, but a muscle feathered in his jaw. He was not a man accustomed to being refused. "It is not a request," he said, his voice dropping to a lower, silkier register. "It is the prelude to a job offer." Lena stared at him, bewildered. "A job offer?" "I have a job. A job where you wear a stained apron and serve mediocre food for minimum wage, he countered, his eyes flicking to the faded ketchup mark on her apron. The observation was clinical, not insulting, which somehow made it worse. I am offering you a position as my mother's companion. You will see to her needs. You will read to her. You will accompany her. And you will feed her. The offer was absurd.
It was also terrifying.
To willingly step into this man's world, the world of a mafia boss, was insane. But then she looked at Haewon, at the old woman's serene, sightless face. There was a vulnerability there that called to something deep inside Lena. And then there was the money. He hadn't named a price, but she knew it would be more than she could make in 5 years at the diner. Enough to fix the faulty wiring in her apartment. Enough to stop worrying about the grocery bill every single week. Enough to breathe. Why me? She asked, the question a genuine one. Because for the first time in a very long time, Minjun said, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as he looked at his mother. She is at peace with a stranger. That is a commodity I cannot buy elsewhere. It seems you are the only one who sells it. He placed the card on the table. My driver will pick you up tomorrow at 8. The address is on the back. Be ready. He didn't wait for an answer. He helped his mother to her feet with a gentleness that seemed utterly at odds with the man he was. His guards flanked them, and together they moved away, a tight unit of danger and devotion, leaving Lena alone at the table with a black business card and a decision that felt less like a choice and more like a current, pulling her out to sea. The address on the back of the card led to a skyscraper that pierced the clouds, a monument of steel and glass that seemed to sneer at the grittier, more honest buildings surrounding it. Lena stood before it the next morning, feeling small and out of place in her best clothes, a simple black dress she'd bought at a thrift store. The lobby was a cavern of white marble and hushed reverence. A man in a suit, different from the ones yesterday but cut from the same intimidating cloth, was waiting for her. He led her to a private elevator that ascended without a sound, the numbers climbing at a dizzying speed. The penthouse was less an apartment and more a self-contained universe. The windows were vast sheets of glass, offering a god's-eye view of the city sprawling below. The furniture was minimalist and severe, all clean lines and muted colors. It was beautiful and sterile, a space designed to be admired, not lived in. Haewon was sitting in a chair by the window, a cashmere blanket over her lap. She turned her head as Lena entered, a faint smile gracing her lips. The girl with the kind hands, she said in accented English. Lena felt a blush creep up her neck. She spent the morning reading to Haewon from a book of Korean poetry, her voice filling the vast, silent space. It was peaceful, a strange domestic island in an ocean of unspoken threat. Minjun was not there, but his presence was everywhere, in the severe elegance of the decor, in the silent efficiency of the staff, in the way the air itself seemed to hold its breath. He returned in the afternoon. He entered the room as he had entered the patio, without a sound, a sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure. He stood in the doorway, watching them. Lena was helping Haewon with a cup of tea, her hand steadying the older woman's. He watched the simple act with an intensity that made Lena's skin prickle. He was studying her, trying to solve the puzzle of her. Why had she been kind? What did she want? In his world, every action had a motive, every kindness a price. He could not comprehend an act born of simple compassion. It was a language he did not speak. Later, he called her into his office, a room lined with books that looked as though they had never been read. My mother's happy, he stated, looking out the window at the city below. You're doing your job well. I'm just keeping her company, Lena said. That is the job, he replied, turning to face her. The salary will be deposited into your account weekly. It will be sufficient, he paused. There are rules. You will not ask questions about my business. You will not speak of what you see or hear in this house. You are here for my mother. Nothing more. Is that understood? Yes, she said. But she knew it was a lie. She was already curious. She was curious about the man who was a feared Korean mafia boss, but who tucked a blanket around his sleeping mother. She was curious about the profound sadness she saw in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. She was curious about the world he kept hidden behind his controlled facade. And she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that her curiosity was far more dangerous than his rules. From Minjun's perspective, the girl was an anomaly. a glitch in the system of his meticulously controlled world. He had spent his life navigating a landscape of threats, allegiances, and betrayals. Everyone he met wanted something from him: power, money, protection, or his death. Their motives were transparent, their actions predictable. He understood the grammar of greed and fear. He did not understand Lena. He had watched the security footage from the cafe patio a dozen times. He had seen her, tired after her shift, choose to stay. He had watched her feed his mother with a patience and gentleness he had not witnessed since his own father was alive. There was no angle, no play. It was a purely altruistic act, and the purity of it baffled him. It made him suspicious. He had his men run a background check. Lena Davis, 19, an orphan raised in the foster system. No criminal record. Worked 2 jobs to afford a tiny apartment in a bad neighborhood. Her life was a testament to quiet survival, a long, unbroken line of just getting by. She was utterly, disappointingly ordinary. And yet, she had accomplished what his money and power could not. She had broken through his mother's wall of grief-stricken silence. After his father's death, Haewon had retreated into herself, and her blindness, once a manageable condition, had become a fortress. She refused help, trusting no one. Until Lena. He found himself watching her. He would stand in the doorway of the living room and observe as she read to his mother, her voice a low, calming melody. He watched as she described the changing colors of the sky as the sun set, painting a picture for a woman who could not see. She moved through his cold, empty home and filled it with a warmth it had not known. She was not afraid of him. That was the most unsettling part. His employees were terrified of him. His enemies, rightly so. Even his allies treated him with a careful, calculated deference. Lena looked at him directly. She answered his questions with an unadorned honesty that was both refreshing and unnerving. She treated him not as a mafia boss, not as a figure of fear, but as a man. His mother's son. It was disarming. It was dangerous. He was Park Min-jun, leader of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, a man who had inherited a criminal empire and made it twice as powerful, twice as ruthless. He had blood on his hands, secrets that could topple governments. He was a monster in a bespoke suit. And this girl, this waitress, with her thrift store dress and her steady gaze, she was beginning to make him forget what he was. She was a single, soft note in a symphony of violence, and he was terrified he was starting to prefer the melody to the noise. One evening, a week into her employment, Lena stayed late. A storm was raging outside, and Min-jun had insisted his driver would take her home when it passed. He was working in his office, and Haewon had fallen asleep in her chair. The penthouse was quiet except for the sound of rain lashing against the windows. A catering service delivered their meals every day, sterile containers of perfectly prepared food. Tonight, Lena found herself in the vast and used kitchen. On a whim, she found rice, eggs, and some vegetables in the pristine refrigerator. She began to cook. The simple, domestic sounds, the chop of the knife, the sizzle of oil in a pan, felt like a small rebellion in the silent, imposing space. She made a simple fried rice, the kind of comfort food she'd learned to make for herself when she was a lonely kid in a group home. The smell, rich and savory, filled the apartment. She heard a noise and turned. Min-jun was standing in the kitchen doorway, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He looked tired. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I was hungry," she said simply. "There's enough for 3, she didn't know why she offered. It was an impulse. He hesitated, then walked into the kitchen and sat at the small island. It was probably the first time he had ever done so. Lena served 2 plates, setting one in front of him. They ate in silence, the only sounds the clinking of their forks and the drumming of the rain. The food wasn't fancy. It was simple, nourishing, and real. "It's good," he said after a few minutes. The admission seemed to cost him something. "Thank you." They finished their meal. Lena stood to clear the plates. "Leave it," he said. "The staff will clean it in the morning." "I don't mind," she said, taking his plate to the sink. She could feel his eyes on her back. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice quiet. "Do what?"
Stay.
At the cafe, Lena stopped, her back still to him. She thought for a moment. She looked lonely, she said. "I know what that feels like." She turned to face him then. The distance between them felt charged, electric. In his eyes, she saw a flicker of something she had not seen before. Not calculation, not suspicion. A deep, profound vulnerability. It was the look of a man who was just as lonely as the old woman on the patio. In that moment, the Korean Mafia boss disappeared. All she saw was Min-jun, a man in a silent house, eating a simple meal, watching the rain fall. It was a dangerous illusion, but she let herself believe it, just for a second. The illusion shattered 3 nights later. Lena was reading a novel to Haewon when the world exploded. The sound was deafening, a concussive blast that shook the building to its foundations. The floor-to-ceiling window across the room spiderwebbed, then imploded, showering the marble floor with a cascade of glittering, deadly shards. Alarms blared, a high-pitched, insistent scream. Lena's first instinct was pure animal terror. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her second, overriding instinct was Haewon. She threw herself over the old woman, shielding her frail body with her own as the room was plunged into chaos. Men in dark suits, Min-jun's men, materialized from nowhere, guns drawn, shouting in Korean. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and fear. Min-jun himself appeared, moving with a lethal grace that was terrifying to behold. He held a pistol in his hand, and he used it with an efficiency that spoke of long, brutal practice. He was no longer the quiet son, the lonely man. He was the mafia boss, a predator in his element. He barked orders, directing his men, his face a mask of cold fury. His eyes found Lena, huddled over his mother. For a split second, his focus broke. A new kind of fear entered his eyes. Not for himself, not for his empire, but for them. "Get her out of here," he roared at one of his men, pointing towards Lena and Haewon. The guard grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her up.
"No,"
Lena shouted, clinging to Haewon. "I'm not leaving her." The guard tried to separate them, but Lena held on with a strength born of pure adrenaline. She would not let this terrified, blind woman face this alone. Min-jun crossed the room in 3 long strides, the sounds of gunfire echoing from the hallway. He knelt in front of them, grabbing Lena's shoulders. His grip was like iron. "Lena, look at me," he commanded. She met his gaze. His eyes were wild, desperate. "You have to go with him. He will take you both to safety. I need you to be brave. I need you to protect my mother. Do you understand?" He wasn't asking her as an employer. He was begging her. In the midst of chaos and violence, he was entrusting her with the one thing in the world he truly valued. "Okay," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Okay." The guard led them away, down a service corridor and into a reinforced elevator. As the door slid shut, Lena's last image of Min-jun was of him standing amidst the wreckage of his perfect, sterile home, a gun in his hand, turning to face the violence that was his life. The safe house was a nondescript apartment miles away, anonymous and Spartan. It was clean, but it had the transient feel of a place no one called home. For 2 days, Lena and Haewon stayed there, guarded by one of Min-jun's silent men. Lena cared for Haewon, who was shaken but unharmed. They spoke little, but their silence was a shared comfort, a bond forged in terror. On the 3rd night, Min-jun arrived. He looked like a ghost. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a cut on his cheek was stitched with stark black thread. His suit was rumpled. The invincible armor was cracked. He sent the guard away, leaving the 3 of them alone. He went first to his mother, kneeling before her and speaking in low, soothing Korean. He held her hand, his head bowed. Lena watched from the doorway, feeling like an intruder on a moment of profound, private grief. After a few minutes, he left his mother, who had drifted off to sleep, and came to the small kitchen where Lena was making tea. He leaned against the counter, the posture of a man held up only by his own will. "It was a rival faction," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "A message. They know my mother is my weakness." He looked at Lena then, and the control in his eyes was gone, replaced by a raw, unguarded emotion. "And now they know you are, too." The words hung between them, a confession more intimate than any touch. "They saw you," he continued. "They saw how you protected her. In their world, that kind of loyalty is not given freely. They will assume you are mine. That makes you a target." Lena's hands trembled, and she gripped the warm mug of tea. "So what happens now?" she asked. "I can make you disappear," he said, his voice flat. "A new name, a new life, somewhere far away from all this. You would be safe. You would be free." It was the out she should have been praying for. A chance to escape this dark, violent world and go back to her simple, anonymous life. But the thought of leaving, of never seeing him or his mother again, left a hollow ache in her chest. She had seen the monster,
But she had also seen the man.
and she was no longer sure where one ended and the other began. She looked at him, really looked at him, at the exhaustion etched on his face, at the profound loneliness in his soul. She saw the weight of the empire he carried, the blood on his hands, the love for his mother that was his only anchor. "And what about you?" she asked softly. He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "You offer to send me away, to keep me safe." "Who keeps you safe, Minjun?" The question seemed to break something in him. He closed his eyes, a shudder running through his powerful frame. For the first time, he looked not like a feared Korean mafia boss, but like a man utterly and completely alone. He was silent for a long time. "No one," he finally whispered. The word was a shard of glass. "I chose this life.
Or it chose me.
It does not matter which. The consequences are the same. I am what I am." He opened his eyes, and they were filled with a terrible, bleak honesty. "You should run from me, Lena. I am a poison. Everything I touch, I corrupt or destroy. My whole life. People have left," Lena said, her voice quiet but firm. "Foster parents, friends, people who were supposed to care. I'm tired of running, and I'm tired of being left behind." She took a step closer to him, closing the space between them. The air was thick with unspoken feelings, with the terrifying possibility of what came next. "What if I don't want to go?" she asked. "What if I want to stay?" His breath hitched. He looked at her as if she were a language he was only just beginning to learn, a puzzle he was desperate to solve. "To stay is to choose this," he said, gesturing vaguely at the world outside, a world of violence and shadows. "It is to choose me. All of me." He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment before his fingers gently brushed her cheek. His touch was tentative, almost reverent. "They will say I forced you, that I took you. They will call you the mafia boss's wife. I don't care what they say," she said, leaning into his touch. Her choice was reckless, insane. It defied all logic and every instinct for self-preservation. But it felt like the only true thing she had ever done. "I will not be taken. I will choose to stay." A single tear tracked its way down his face, a crack in the marble facade. He did not offer her a ring, or a promise of a normal life. He offered her the only thing he had, the dangerous, complicated truth of himself. And in the quiet of the safe house, surrounded by the ghosts of his violent life, Lena accepted. It was not a fairy tale ending, but a beginning, fragile and uncertain. A quiet promise made between a waitress and a king in a kingdom of shadows.